Emily thought her 6-year wedding anniversary would be a quiet celebration, one last chance to salvage a crumbling marriage. But inside a high-end restaurant with champagne glasses clinking and her in-laws watching, her husband Ryan stood up, raised a toast to being free, single and searching, then handed her a custom t-shirt that read, 6 years of disappointment. What followed wasn't heartbreak, it was war. Set in the world of polished appearances and calculated cruelty, this story unravels a woman's journey from silent wife to fearless strategist. As betrayals multiply, emotional, financial and generational, Emily uncovers a web of manipulation that stretches beyond her marriage and deep into the roots of a powerful family. But she doesn't fall apart. She rises, with a plan that will shatter their perfect image. What would you do if the people who smiled at your wedding planned your public humiliation? And by the way, where in the world are you watching this video from? Tell us in the comments below. The clink of glass cut through the restaurant like a shot. Ryan stood, his champagne flute raised, eyes gleaming with something cold and triumphant. To 6 years of marriage, he announced. And to being free, single and searching. I blinked, unsure if I had heard him correctly. But the way Barbara smirked behind her wine glass, and the slight nod Richard gave from across the table, told me this wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was theater. And I was the stage. The room, filled with couples and birthday parties and quiet laughter, fell quiet around us. All eyes turned toward our corner table. The moment had been designed, scripted for maximum humiliation. Ryan, still standing, reached down and pulled out a black gift box from beneath his chair. A little something to commemorate our journey, he added with mock cheer. I kept my hands steady as I lifted the lid. Inside was a neatly folded t-shirt. Across the front, in bold white letters, it read, 6 years of disappointment. Barbara laughed aloud, loud enough to turn heads. Richard's lips twisted into a smirk of satisfaction. My fingers gripped the edge of the table, not to steady the gift but to steady myself. I felt the sting behind my eyes, the rush of heat to my cheeks. But it didn't break me. Not anymore. I stood up slowly. My chair scraped softly against the floor, echoing like a warning. I reached into my purse, my fingers brushing past a velvet box and a set of folded papers until I found what I was looking for. Calmly, deliberately, I placed the envelope in front of Ryan. His smile faltered. "What's this?" he asked, suddenly unsure. "Happy anniversary," I said, my voice clear, unshaken. "It's a certified copy of our divorce filing. Signed, dated and filed this morning." His face paled. I turned to Barbara, whose fork had frozen midway to her mouth. "Oh, and that t-shirt? You might want to hold on to it. I think it fits your family better than it ever did me." The room was silent now, a stillness so complete I could hear the soft hum of the overhead lights. I looked back at Ryan. "You thought tonight would be the night you humiliated me. But all you've done is give me the perfect stage." He blinked, speechless. "I've been quiet for too long," I continued. "I've smiled through your lies. I've endured your silence, your absence, your betrayals. But tonight I get to speak." From across the restaurant someone dropped a spoon. The clatter barely registered. "You want a toast?" I raised my glass. "Here's to freedom. Mine." Before Ryan could respond, I turned to the entrance and gave a subtle nod. From the shadows near the bar, a tall man stepped into view. His presence commanded attention without needing to speak. "Michael." He walked toward our table, calm, steady, unbothered by the growing whispers among the diners. Barbara's wineglass trembled slightly in her hand. Richard stared at Michael like he was seeing a ghost. And in a way he was. Michael stopped beside me, placing a hand gently on my back. "Hello, Mother," he said, voice even but firm. "Richard." Barbara found her voice first. "What are you doing here?" I answered for him. "He's here because the truth finally deserves a seat at this table." Ryan stood now, shoulders rigid, eyes darting between me and his brother. "You and him, what is this?" "A reckoning," I said simply. I reached into my purse once more, this time pulling out a leather folder. I laid it flat in front of Richard, opened it and turned it toward him. Inside were original partnership documents, bank records and notarized affidavits. "Michael still owns a quarter of Collins Financial," I said. "And on Monday your lawyers will be very busy." Barbara's jaw clenched. "You planned this?" "No," I said. "You did. You spent years tearing people down, manipulating them into silence. You raised a son who believes cruelty is a form of power. You created this moment. All I did was choose not to let it destroy me. The air in the restaurant shifted. Not one person looked away. Michael reached into his coat pocket and handed me a small velvet box. I opened it, then held it up just enough for them to see. A positive pregnancy test. One more announcement, I added softly. Michael and I are expecting. This child will never know your version of love. They will be raised in truth and peace and dignity. Barbara gasped. Ryan's mouth opened, then closed again. No words came. And just like that I smiled. Not from spite but from clarity. From knowing I had taken back every piece of myself they tried to break. I picked up the shirt, folded it gently, and set it beside Barbara's untouched appetizer. Keep it. A souvenir from the last night you thought you were in control. Michael took my hand. We walked past the tables, past the wide-eyed patrons, and through the door into the cool night air. Just before we stepped off the curb, I heard Ryan's voice behind us. This isn't over. I turned one last time, meeting his eyes without a hint of fear. You're right about one thing, Ryan. I am free now. And I was. But before this moment, before the calm, came the fire. Let me take you back, 3 months before this night, to when the unraveling began. 3 months earlier, our house had already begun to feel unfamiliar. Not in the way that furniture feels out of place or decorations need refreshing, but in the quiet, creeping sense that something was missing. Something vital. Something alive. Ryan had started working late again. Not just once or twice a week. Every night. He would text me around 6, always some variation of "big meeting, don't wait up." At first I believed him. That was the kind of wife I had tried to be. Trusting, supportive, understanding. But eventually the pattern grew too consistent to ignore. There was always a faint trace of cologne when he came home. Not his usual scent, the one I had picked out for his birthday 3 years ago. This was something sharper, newer, worn for someone else. When I asked about it, he laughed, said he'd grabbed the wrong bottle at the gym. Then he'd disappear into the shower, closing the door like a wall between us. At night he no longer reached for me. He'd slide into bed wordlessly, body angled away, screen glow from his phone lighting his face while he scrolled until sleep came. I tried to touch his arm once. He flinched. Said he was tired. Said work was draining. Then he rolled away and pulled the covers with him. I didn't cry that night. I just lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering when exactly the man I married had become a stranger lying next to me. Sunday mornings used to be sacred. Breakfast in pajamas, coffee shared on the porch. But now they were his time with his father. Golf games. Networking brunches. Family tradition he called it. I was never invited. And when I suggested we plan something for our anniversary, his eyes actually lit up. "Leave it to me," he said, smiling like a man with a secret. "I want to make it special." I should have paid attention to that smile. It was too practiced, too easy. Still, for a moment I believed him. I wanted to. That night I made his favorite meal. I wore the dress he once said made me look like the version of myself I didn't believe existed. I waited at the dinner table for him to come home. He didn't. A text came at 9:47. "Caught up with Dad. Late. Sorry." No punctuation. No warmth. I washed the dishes and put the food away untouched. Then I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in the living room, lights off, staring at the shadows shifting on the walls. The silence had grown loud in our home. It clung to every surface. Every photograph. Every room where love used to live. It wasn't just the intimacy that had faded. It was the conversation, the shared looks, the way we used to know each other without words. Now even small talk felt forced. Robotic. Like we were actors reading from different scripts. His schedule became more unpredictable, and mine became filled with empty spaces I couldn't explain to anyone. Once I asked him outright, "Are you happy?" He didn't look up from his laptop. "What kind of question is that?" "A real one," I said softly. He didn't answer. A week later I came home to find a framed photo missing from the hallway. It was the one from our honeymoon. Us laughing on a beach in Maui, sun-drunk and dizzy with each other. I found the frame in the hall closet, face down beneath a pile of old tax returns. The glass had a crack across my smile. I asked Ryan about it. He said he was cleaning. Didn't want it to fall. But I knew the truth. He didn't want to see it anymore. There are moments in a marriage when something unspoken shifts. Not loudly. Not in some climactic fight. But silently, like a door closing behind you that you hadn't realized was open. I felt that shift in the way he walked past me without looking. In the way he stopped asking me about my day. In the way he started using headphones at dinner, scrolling through his phone while I sat across from him in silence. And still I tried. Kept trying. Because trying meant there was still something left to save. Because I wanted to believe we were just going through a phase. Because I wasn't ready to admit the truth. Until one afternoon when I reached into the laundry and found a crumpled receipt from a place I didn't recognize. And everything began to unravel. Now looking back, I understand. The signs were always there. I had just refused to see them. But the moment I held that receipt in my hand, something inside me cracked. And the version of me that had been waiting, enduring, pretending, she finally began to disappear. The receipt was crumpled, damp at the edges from the spin cycle, and barely legible under the fluorescent light of the laundry room. I almost tossed it in the trash without a second glance. But something about the bold, blocky lettering caught my eye. Custom printworks. One black t-shirt. White vinyl text. Special order. The date printed across the top was 3 weeks earlier. A Friday night. One of the many Ryan had claimed to be stuck at the office finishing a proposal for a client I had never met. I stared at it for a long time, the paper shaking slightly between my fingers. There was no name on it, no details beyond the item description. But deep down I already knew. I knew it wasn't a gift for a friend. Not a joke between coworkers. It was meant for me. I just didn't know why yet. I placed the receipt on the counter and backed away from it like it might explode. That evening I didn't mention it. I couldn't. I watched Ryan across the dinner table, his head bent over his phone again, thumb moving in mechanical motions. He didn't look at me. Didn't ask about my day. Didn't notice I hadn't touched my food. Instead he stood up mid-meal and muttered, "Going to finish some emails," before walking to his office, door clicking shut behind him. I sat there in the silence. Then I walked to our bedroom and opened my laptop. I started small. I checked our shared calendar, looking back at every late-night work excuse. I pulled up his bank statements. Sifted through credit card charges. There they were. Quietly spaced out. Hotel reservations. Restaurants we never visited together. Jewelry stores. One in particular caught my attention. It was a boutique known for personalized charms and custom engraving. I'd never received anything from there. For the first time I stopped pretending this was a rough patch. This was betrayal. Not accidental. Not emotional distance that grew over time. Intentional. Calculated. With a timeline and paper trail. The next day I waited until Ryan left for work. Then I entered his office. I never snooped before. Not once in 6 years. But that day I opened drawers, folders, email tabs left logged in. It was a desperate excavation of whatever secrets he hadn't buried deep enough. That's when I found the burner phone. It was tucked behind old travel brochures inside a desk drawer he rarely used. The moment I powered it on, it lit up with messages. Dozens of them. Hundreds. The contact name was simple. D. I didn't have to guess twice. The texts were intimate. Coordinated. Phew. Ryan complained about me, my cooking, my clothes, my cloying loyalty. He referred to me as the problem, a temporary nuisance to be handled. They talked about the t-shirt. The anniversary. The plan. I stopped reading when I realized I was crying without sound. But the grief didn't last long. Beneath the tears, something hard was beginning to form. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Bigger. He had used my trust as a shield for his cruelty. He thought I was too passive, too naive, too desperate to notice the dismantling of my own life. And maybe for a while I was. But not anymore. I took photos of every message. Every receipt. Every transaction. I created a backup drive and locked it in my closet. If he was preparing for war, so was I. That night I sat across from him at dinner. He was relaxed, even smug, tossing his napkin onto his plate after barely eating. "Looking forward to our anniversary?" I asked, voice light. He glanced at me with a grin that made my skin crawl. "Oh, you have no idea." I smiled back, mirroring his energy. "Good. I want it to be unforgettable." He chuckled and got up to leave the table. Behind my smile I was already strategizing. Because now I knew something he didn't. He wasn't the only one with a plan. And the next piece of the puzzle was waiting for me in a place I least expected. A tiny coffee shop with a barista who had been watching far more than she let on. The cafe was small, tucked between a laundromat and an insurance office, with chipped paint on the awning and a bell that jingled every time the door opened. I had started going there for quiet, to escape the silence at home. I never expected to find answers. Megan, the barista, had one of those easy smiles that didn't push conversation unless invited. She learned my order by the third visit. A few weeks into my routine, I found myself opening up to her without meaning to. There was something about the space and maybe the weight I'd been carrying that made the words fall out. "Rough day?" she asked, setting my latte down like usual. "Rough year," I answered before I could stop myself. She tilted her head slightly, then hesitated like she was debating something. "Your last name wouldn't happen to be Turner, would it?" My heart stuttered. "It is." "Why?" She glanced around, lowered her voice. "I didn't want to get involved. I probably shouldn't. But I also think you deserve to know." I nodded, my pulse rising. "I work weekends at Vincenzo's," she said. "Your in-laws are regulars. I've served your husband, his parents, and sometimes a blonde woman. They've come in most Sundays for months. I always assumed you were out of town or something, but..." She stopped herself. Loudly. And not kindly. My hands went cold. "They mentioned an anniversary dinner coming up. Talked about it like it was a performance. Something big. Something you wouldn't forget." They laughed. I sat very still. She added, "The woman isn't always there. But when she is, Barbara treats her like family. Calls her Diane." Diane. Barbara's personal assistant. Always in the background. Always perfectly polite. I'd seen her dozens of times, never thought twice. I looked at Megan. "Did you ever see my husband with her alone?" She shook her head. "Never at the same time. But the way they talk, they're hiding something. I'd want someone to tell me if it were me." I thanked her. Truly. Not just for the information but for the quiet compassion in her voice. Before I left, I turned back and asked, "Can you describe her?" She nodded. Mid-30s. Blonde. Designer everything. Confident. Like she belongs there. I walked out of the cafe and into the cold spring air, stunned by the simplicity of it all. The truth had been paraded in public while I sat at home, wondering why the silence felt so heavy. I didn't cry this time. Instead, I drove straight to the bank and requested a copy of the last 3 months of joint account statements. Then I sat in my car with a highlighter and combed through them line by line. Dinners at restaurants I'd never heard of. Hotel charges under aliases. Jewelry stores. Florists. The paper trail didn't lie. It painted a picture far more detailed than words ever could. That night, Ryan came home later than usual. Smelled different again. He made no effort to explain it. Just breezed past me, whistling as if his world were perfectly in order. I watched him disappear down the hall. Then I walked into the kitchen, took out my laptop and began organizing everything. Every receipt. Every time-stamped message. Every email forward from our bank. Not because I needed to convince myself anymore, but because I needed to be ready. I had tried confronting him once weeks ago, asking if he was happy. His silence was answer enough. But this was bigger than unhappiness. This was strategy. And I wasn't going to be caught defenseless. Still, part of me wanted to understand why. Why the performance? Why the planning? Why bring Diane into a dinner meant to humiliate me instead of just walking away? I thought about Barbara. And suddenly I knew. This wasn't just about Ryan. It was about control. About image. About a family that had always treated me like a guest instead of a member. I remembered the first year of marriage, how Barbara had insisted on changing our wedding colors because navy blue wasn't sophisticated enough. How she picked our real estate agent. How she insisted I take her family's name. They had never seen me as permanent. Now it seemed they were preparing to make that official. But I had no intention of fading quietly. I had pieces. Now I needed the full picture. I needed to know just how far they were willing to go. Because only then could I decide how far I'd go to stop them. And I knew where to start. If I wanted to know the depth of Ryan's betrayal, I needed to look where he thought I'd never go. His financial records. That would be my next step. And the truth waiting there would be more than just betrayal. It would be the blueprint of the war they were quietly waging against me. The first thing I did was schedule an appointment with a divorce attorney. Not because I was ready to file, not yet. but because I needed information. I needed to understand what protections existed for someone like me. Someone married, vulnerable, and being quietly erased. Her name was Sarah Reeves. Mid-40s, razor-sharp, with a calm, professional tone that didn't flinch even once as I recounted the last few weeks of my life. We sat across from each other in her quiet downtown office while I slid a manila folder across the desk, containing printouts of emails, screenshots of texts, copies of financial statements. I had done my homework. When I finished, Sarah leaned back slightly, folded her hands and said, "They're not just leaving you, Emily. They're setting you up to lose." She explained my legal rights, how I was entitled to half of our marital assets, and how I could begin separating finances without violating any laws so long as I documented everything. "Move your share now," she advised, "before they empty the accounts. It's not revenge. It's preservation." That night, while Ryan was in his office working, I logged into our joint accounts and took exactly half of what remained. Then I opened a new account under my name only and moved my inheritance from my grandmother, money that had always been mine, untouched for years, into that separate fund. It wasn't just money. It was leverage. A step toward freedom. The next day I climbed into the attic where we kept old paperwork and boxes labeled with past lives. Ryan had insisted on storing our tax returns and legal documents up there, claiming it was easier to keep them all in one place. What he really meant was, easier for you not to see them. The air was dusty and thick, cobwebs curling between the beams. I found the filing cabinet near the back, an old dented thing that looked untouched for years. Inside I found what I expected: mortgage papers, insurance policies, tax records. But tucked in the bottom drawer was something else. A small cardboard box labeled family. I opened it. Inside were photo albums, some dating back decades. Barbara and Richard at charity events. Ryan in high school with his football trophies. But one album was different. Smaller. Bound in cracked leather. The cover simply read, Michael. Page after page showed Ryan as a teenager, standing beside another boy, taller, darker-haired, with the same jawline but different eyes. There was laughter in those photos. Real, unfiltered joy. I had never seen Ryan smile like that. I flipped to the back. Written in faded ink, Jake and Michael. Summer 1998. Jake. My husband's real name wasn't Ryan? I blinked. Then I found the newspaper clippings. One with a grainy black and white photo. Local student wins full scholarship to Princeton. Another, 3 years later. Michael Collins joins leading investment firm in New York. And then, nothing. No mention in more recent family photos. No references. As if he'd been erased. 6 years of marriage. Not once had Ryan mentioned having a brother. I brought the album downstairs and stared at it for hours, piecing together what little I could from memory and assumption. Why would a family wipe out their own son from history? The next day I visited Mrs. Porter, our elderly neighbor who had lived next door to the Collins family for decades. I brought a homemade pie as an excuse. "Did you know Ryan had a brother?" I asked casually, sliding the album across her coffee table. She froze, blinking twice. "Of course, Michael. Kindest boy I ever met. What happened to him?" She sighed, setting her teacup down with a gentle clink. "Michael wanted out. Richard had him lined up to take over the family firm, but that boy had a conscience. Found some issues. Said he'd report them if things didn't change. That was the end of it. They cut him off. Never spoke of him again. And Ryan. They were close. But Ryan always needed approval. After Michael left, Barbara and Richard poured everything into him. Told him who to be, where to work, even who to marry. I didn't say anything, but my chest tightened. They never thought you were permanent," she added gently. "Barbara used to say you were just a phase." I left her house in silence. The Collins family hadn't just been planning to discard me. They had done it before. To their own blood. And they were doing it again. Only this time I wasn't going to vanish quietly. I had proof now. Of who they were. Of what they were capable of. But if I wanted to win, I needed an ally who had survived their storm before me. I needed to find Michael Collins. Finding Michael Collins was easier than I expected. A quick search on LinkedIn brought up his profile. Financial consultant, Boston-based, Princeton graduate. His photo revealed a face strikingly similar to Ryan's. Sharper, more thoughtful, with eyes that looked like they had lived through things most people wouldn't understand. His biography was strictly professional, no mention of family, no personal details. So I knew. This was him. I sat at my desk for nearly an hour crafting the message. I kept it simple. Just enough to get his attention without alarming him. My name is Emily Turner. I'm married to Ryan. I believe there are things about your family we should discuss. Would you be willing to meet? He replied the next morning. 4 words. Cornerstone K. Sunday. Noon. The drive to Boston was long and quiet. I didn't play music. I needed the silence. To rehearse the words. To brace for the unknown. What if he didn't believe me? What if this was all a mistake? But the moment I saw him, alone at a corner table, posture guarded, eyes scanning the room, I knew. This was not a man surprised by betrayal. This was someone who had survived it. He stood as I approached. No smile. Just a measured look and a quiet, "Emily." We shook hands. I sat. "You don't look anything like the wedding photo my mother keeps on the mantel," he said almost dryly. My mouth parted in surprise. "She still displays our wedding photo?" He nodded. "She points to it whenever she says, she was the best Ryan could do." The casual cruelty wasn't shocking anymore, but it still landed like a slap. I folded my hands on the table. "I suppose I should ask what disaster brought you here," he said, eyes sharp but not unkind. I exhaled slowly. "Ryan is planning to humiliate me at our anniversary dinner. A toast to being single again. A custom t-shirt that says 6 years of disappointment. He's been moving money into a private account. Your mother is involved. Possibly Diane too." He didn't blink. Just nodded, jaw tight. "Sounds about right. Public humiliation is one of Barbara's favorite games." "You're not surprised." "I'm not," he said quietly. "Most people would file for divorce and walk away. But if you're sitting here, I assume that's not your plan." "I tried to keep the peace for 6 years," I said. "It didn't work. Now I want to understand what I'm really dealing with." Michael took a sip of his coffee, then leaned forward slightly. "Let me paint the picture for you." Over the next hour he detailed the family I had married into. Richard built Colin's financial on favors and secrets, not ethics. Barbara used social leverage to maintain their pristine image. Michael joined the firm straight out of college, eager to build something respectable. But 3 months in he uncovered systematic fraud. Small percentages skimmed off client accounts. When he confronted Richard, he was dismissed, told those were informal management fees the clients had verbally approved. "I threatened to report it," Michael said, voice steady. "And I was erased." Erased wasn't a metaphor. His bank accounts were frozen. His name removed from the company website. His credit cards cancelled. All within 24 hours. "And Ryan?" I asked. Michael looked away for a moment. "He called. One time. Said he wanted to hear my side. I heard Dad in the background asking who was on the phone. Ryan said, 'No one,' and hung up. I let that sink in. The echo of betrayal. Familiar and cruel. I always wondered why Ryan never mentioned you. Because if he did, it would remind him of what he became," Michael said. "He was the spare until I was gone. Then he became the heir. But everything he has was given, not earned." I stared at the man across from me. The lost brother. The proof that I was not crazy. That this family had done this before. "Did they choose who he married?" I asked softly. Michael nodded. "Especially that. Barbara probably told you how refreshing you were the first time you met." "She did. They wanted someone they could mold. Grateful. Quiet. Convenient." And when I started asking questions, I trailed off. "The countdown to replacement began," he finished. We sat in silence for a long moment. The weight of it all hanging between us. Then he reached into his bag and pulled out a folder. "I kept these," he said. "Insurance. Just in case I ever needed to come back." Inside were the original partnership documents. Proof that the company was co-owned by Richard, Michael, and, eventually, any rightful heirs. By law, Michael still owned 25%. I stared at the paperwork. At the power it held. "You've never pursued this?" "No," he said. "Starting over was easier than fighting a family that never wanted me. But things are different now." I looked up at him. "Why now?" His gaze softened. "Because you're not the only one they tried to destroy." That evening we walked to a small park nearby. The sun was low, the trees casting long shadows over the grass. We sat on a bench watching a group of kids toss a frisbee. "I'm not just trying to protect myself anymore," I said quietly. "I'm pregnant." Michael didn't flinch. He just asked, "What do you want to do?" And with that one question I knew he was nothing like the man I had married. I looked down at my hands, then back at him. "I want to protect this child. I want to end this cycle." Michael nodded. "Then we do it together." And for the first time in months I didn't feel alone. Our alliance had begun. And now it was time to turn the tables. We had just under 3 weeks until the anniversary dinner. Just under 3 weeks to prepare for a confrontation that would reshape everything. Not just my marriage, but the legacy this family had built on silence, manipulation, and image. I didn't need revenge. I needed clarity, closure, control. And I needed every detail to be airtight. Michael and I sat in his apartment that evening, laptops open, papers spread across the dining table. He was meticulous, calm, focused in a way that steadied me. He never offered pity. Only strategy. Only plans. I showed him the financial trail I had compiled, every hotel charge, every dinner receipt, every quiet withdrawal from our joint accounts. He added them to a timeline, cross-referencing them with messages from the burner phone I'd recovered. We charted how the betrayals overlapped, how the logistics aligned. It wasn't just deception. It was coordinated. We weren't working against one man. We were working against a system. One that Barbara and Richard had built over decades. One that had swept up Ryan and used him as both puppet and weapon. The first priority was legal and financial protection. I met with Vanessa Chin, the financial advisor Sarah Reeves had recommended. She reviewed my records with the clinical detachment of someone who'd seen it all before. "This isn't unusual," she said gently. "What is unusual is how early you caught it. Most don't see it coming until they're already out of options." She guided me through the process of legally documenting asset division. My grandmother's inheritance, she confirmed, was safe as separate property. For the remaining joint funds, she advised I transfer exactly half. No more, no less. "It's your legal right," she said. "If he notices, you say you're diversifying investments. Nothing deceptive. Just strategic." I nodded. Then came the house. Our names were both on the deed, but the down payment had come from Richard and Barbara. A gift, they said at the time, though now I understood that nothing from them ever came without invisible strings. Ryan had a business trip to Philadelphia coming up. I checked his burner phone. He wasn't going alone. He and Diane had plans to meet at a downtown hotel. Perfect. As soon as he pulled out of the driveway, I made my move. I called Malcolm Reed, a discreet real estate agent who specialized in quiet sales for complicated situations. He walked through the house within hours. "The market's hot," he said, tapping on his tablet. "New kitchen, good location. You could get well above your original purchase price." "I'm not ready to list yet," I clarified. "Just need to understand the process. My husband and I are considering options." He caught the subtext immediately. "I've handled my share of divorces, Mrs. Turner. If you choose to move forward, I can have everything prepared in advance. You'll only need both signatures when it's time to finalize." I nodded, accepting the folder he handed me. A full analysis, estimated sale value, timeline. I left the house with more than paperwork. I left with a map out. That night, I met Michael for dinner at his apartment. We spread Vanessa's documents and Malcolm's estimates across the table. "The financial pieces are solid," I said. "The house, the savings, my inheritance, they're protected." He nodded, then pulled out a leather portfolio. "I've been building the case against Collins Financial," he said. "My attorney confirmed the original partnership documents are legally binding. I still own 25% of the company, no matter how many edits my father made after I disappeared." He showed me board meeting minutes, tax records, internal memos. The paper trail was clear. They had erased him on paper but not in law. "This could turn into a lawsuit worth millions," I said quietly. "I've never cared about the money," he replied. "But now." He paused, his hand resting briefly on my abdomen where our child quietly grew. "Now it's not just about me." I nodded, overcome by the gravity of what we were doing. This wasn't just strategy anymore. This was about legacy. About breaking cycles. About refusing to raise a child in a family built on fear and control. I began removing personal items from the house. Photos, heirlooms, anything irreplaceable. Michael helped me rent a small storage unit across town. We kept it under my maiden name. No paper trail. I forwarded my mail to a new P.O. box. Changed every password. Locked down every account that bore my name. The most delicate piece of the plan came when I contacted Megan. We met at a park far from both the cafe and the restaurant. I told her everything. Not the relationship with Michael, not the pregnancy. Just the plan. They want to humiliate me, I said. I'm going to take the stage they built and use it for the truth. Her face darkened with sympathy and quiet fury. What do you need from me? You're working that night, I said. You know the layout. I need eyes. Timing. Help positioning Michael at the right moment. She thought for only a second. Then she nodded. I'm in. We walked through every detail. Where Barbara had requested the table. How long it would take for entrees to be cleared. When Ryan would make his toast. And when I would interrupt. We practiced the speech I would give. Megan listened, corrected my pauses, coached my inflection. By the third run she said, "You're not just going to surprise them. You're going to dismantle them." The final piece came into place 2 days later when Michael's attorney confirmed the documents were ready. Partnership agreements. Financial disclosures. Copies for each member of the Collins family. Michael looked at me across the table. "Are you sure?" he asked. I didn't hesitate. They thought I was weak. They forgot who they married. Now the only thing left was the performance. And I had never been more ready. The day of our anniversary dawned warm and bright, the kind of May Saturday that dared you to believe everything was normal. Ryan brought me coffee in bed, smiling like he had just remembered how to play the role of a loving husband. The gesture was so out of character it felt rehearsed. Almost theatrical. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Dinner's at 7, he said, brushing a kiss across my cheek. "Mom and Dad are excited." I returned his smile. "So am I. Wouldn't miss it for the world." He left shortly after for a golf game with Richard, giving me the entire day for final checks. I called Michael once just to confirm timing. He was already en route, staying at a hotel nearby. Megan texted a simple confirmation. She'd be covering our table. Everything was aligned. At 6:30 I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, smoothing the fabric of my deep blue dress. I wore my grandmother's pearls and nothing else. No wedding ring. No perfume. No fear. Ryan waited downstairs in the charcoal suit I had once said was my favorite. Another detail in his performance. Another miscalculation. "You look nice," he said with mild surprise. "Thank you. It's a special night." We drove in silence. He commented on the weather, the traffic, the market. I watched his hands on the steering wheel. His knuckles whitened slightly as we neared the restaurant. He was nervous. That told me everything. When we arrived at Vincenzo's, Barbara and Richard were already seated at the corner table she had specifically requested. For visibility, not ambience. Barbara wore burgundy as always. Richard stood, shook Ryan's hand, nodded at me as if I were an afterthought. 6 years, Barbara mused, sipping her wine. Hard to believe. I nodded. So much has changed since the wedding. The meal began with polite small talk. Barbara shared stories about country club luncheons. Richard commented on the market. Ryan barely touched his food, eyes flicking to his watch every few minutes. Waiting for his cue. I caught Megan's eye as she approached with wine refills. She gave the smallest nod. The entrees were cleared. The room buzzed softly around us. Then Ryan stood. He tapped his glass with his knife. A sharp ding pierced the table's conversation and drew the attention of nearby diners. Barbara sat straighter. Richard offered a quiet, approving nod. This was their moment. Their stage. "I'd like to make a toast," Ryan announced. "To 6 years of marriage." He paused for effect, then added, "and to being free, single and searching." The words fell into the room like a stone into still water. A few guests glanced our way. Barbara leaned in, smiling. Richard smirked. Ryan reached beneath his chair and retrieved a gift box. "A little something to remember me by," he said, placing it in front of me. I opened it calmly. Inside was the t-shirt, black cotton, white vinyl text. 6 years of disappointment. I looked at it, then at him, and then I stood. "Thank you, Ryan," I said. "That's actually perfect timing. I've been meaning to make an announcement of my own. He blinked. Barbara's fork hovered midair. Richard shifted. I lifted my water glass in a quiet mockery of his toast. For 6 years I tried to earn a place at this table. I smiled through your contempt. I accepted the silence. The judgment. The cruelty. Tonight I want to thank you for finally showing me exactly who you are. Ryan scoffed. Emily, sit down. You're embarrassing yourself. No, Ryan, I said. You did that when you started moving money into a secret account. You did that when you cheated. When you and your mother plotted this circus to humiliate me. Barbara set down her glass sharply. This is hardly appropriate. But the shirt is? I interrupted. The public toast? The lies. No, Barbara. If we're done pretending, let's finish this properly. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder. I've already secured my half of our assets, including the proceeds from the sale of our house, which finalized yesterday. Ryan turned pale. You can't sell our house without my signature. You signed it 3 weeks ago. Remember that pile of papers you initialed without reading? His mouth opened, then shut. I'm not done. I looked toward the entrance and nodded once. Michael stepped forward. The chatter in the restaurant slowed. Guests turned. Barbara's face went white. Richard swore under his breath. Hello, Mother, Michael said. It's been a while. The silence around our table stretched thin and tight. Ryan's voice cracked. You and him? What is this? Truth, I said. Michael has every legal right to be here. Including at your father's company. Michael laid his documents on the table. These are the original partnership papers. I still own 25% of Collins Financial. Your attempts to erase me were illegal. And we'll be filing first thing Monday. Barbara looked like she might faint. But I wasn't finished. One more thing, I said, placing a small velvet box next to the folder. I'm pregnant. And before you ask, no, Ryan, it's not yours. Gasps rippled around the restaurant. This child, I said, my voice steady, will never know manipulation as love. Never be taught silence as survival. He will know freedom. And truth. Barbara's voice came in a harsh whisper. You planned this. No, I said. You did. I just refused to be your victim. I picked up the t-shirt and placed it in front of her. It suits your family more than it ever suited me. Then I reached for Michael's hand, turned and walked out. Behind us, chairs scraped. Glasses clinked. Richard's fist hit the table. We stepped into the night. Michael squeezed my hand. You okay? He asked. I looked up at him. For the first time in 6 years, yes. Ryan's voice chased us through the door. This isn't over. I turned, met his eyes one last time. You're right, Ryan. I am free now. And I meant it. Hand in hand, we walked into the life they tried to deny us. The performance was over. And the truth had finally taken the stage. Some endings don't come with quiet goodbyes. Some arrive in the form of clarity, of a woman rising from the wreckage of betrayal, not just to survive, but to speak, to reclaim, and to choose what comes next. Emily didn't just walk away from a toxic marriage. She walked into a life she defined on her own terms, with truth in her hands and dignity in her voice. And maybe that's the real victory, not revenge but release. What would you have done if you were Emily, standing at that table with the whole room watching? If this story moved you, if you believe in the strength of truth and the quiet power of women who refuse to stay silent, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that don't just entertain, but resonate.